So
This
we are
So,
seeing
conference
the
will now be recorded.
meetings,
sorry,
not the eclipse.
no, I haven't started the Eclipse yet. Um, so the whole thing right now, what we are doing still now is it's as simple as this. Like the APM server is same and the device is same. But the instead of this client, uh, I mean the client code, or we are using inspector over here. This is like an inspector we are using right now. So we are using inspector, and then we are just trying to connect to uh, I mean through inspector we are trying to we connected to the device, and we were actually trying to inspect the elements inside our app. So that's what we are doing. So now we are gonna replace this inspector with our actual code now. So instead of this, we will be using client libraries, and through using client libraries we will be sending the request to the APM server. So we have seen how to actually do this. We gave the capabilities, and we are redirecting our requests to a particular port on this particular on which the server is actually listening on, to that particular IP address. So that is what actually we have done in the last session, right? With that architecture, we were to actually connect to device, and we have seen different things on that device by inspecting different elements. So today the whole point is we will be actually doing this. So we also have seen creating a bat file. So using this bat file, we could simply launch our uh, mm, device in short time. So let me keep up the requirement for you for today's session. So today what we're gonna do is we are actually going to uh, change this inspector with our code, which is a client code using client libraries. So this code will drive the app in the emulator now. So this is going to drive the app, the same app which we have identified in our last session. So the app that we have seen in the last session is API demos, right? So in this API demos, we will launch this API demo using client code by adding relevant jar files. And also the flows that we're going to automate today is we will click on this preference, which covers how to actually tap on a particular button uh, in the mobile device. And after that, we will move on to default values. Okay, so in the default values, so till now we covered click, right? Click is something which we have covered in the operations that we have done so far. And then we will see clicking on a checkbox. Okay, and then unselecting this checkbox, and also validating if the checkbox is selected or not. So if you remember, we have a method called as selected in Selenium, which tells us whether the checkbox is selected or not, right? So we have another way of doing that in Appium. I'll shortly let you know that, but we are actually covering the checkbox flow in this particular field. So what we're going to do is we select this particular checkbox, and we unselect this, and we also check the status of it, whether the checkbox is selected or not. So if I mean to say, like, status in the sense, when this is checked, I should get a true, saying like which indicates the checkbox is selected. Vice versa, if this is unselected, I should get false. Okay, so that's the whole context, and that's one of the operations that we're going to cover today. And then we covered click or tap on a particular button, and we are also covering checkbox in this flow. And the third thing that we're going to cover is we will go ahead and click on this edit checkbox. So what we're going to do here is we have to enter some text. We have to clear the existing content in this text box, and we have to give new content. Okay, let's say favorite animal is something that I'm giving, and I'll be clicking on OK. Once I clicked on OK, when I click it back again, I should validate the same text is coming on the, uh, I mean, the same text is actually visible uh, on this checkbox, or the default value what we have given is and is there. So by automating this flow, we are actually learning how to enter text into a text box, and also how to clear the existing text in a text box. And we will also learn how to actually get the text which is already there in the text box. So with this we will cover all the flows related to the text boxes. Okay, so again, clicking on cancel or clicking on OK is something which is related to clicking and tapping. Okay, so we covered click on a button, checkbox, and text box things with this flow. And the next thing that we're gonna learn is how to handle um, the radio buttons. So this is different from this. Okay, this is radio button. So we select an option, and we will also see whether that option is the selected option is the text that we want to select. So we pass the text and we will try to select that particular option. So when I say Charlie option 3, I pass that as a parameter. So when I pass that as a parameter, that particular option needs to get selected. Okay, so I'll pass Charlie, the third option, and again I'll go there and I'll see whether that is checked or not, whether the intended is checked or not. So it's a validation. So with this, we will be covering radio buttons as well. So I'll keep this flow so that you will understand everything, I mean the operations that we're covering, and also we will also write the methods relevant to each and every field. So what I'm saying is we will cover click or tap on a button is the first operation that we have seen. And then s- what is that, check boxes. We are gonna cover check boxes, and the next step that we're gonna do is uh, validating the state, or getting the state of the checkbox. I'll say getting the state of checkbox, which means whether it is selected or not. That means, which means checkbox is selected or not. Okay, and then we're gonna cover text boxes. So what are all that we will learn here is clear a text box, entering a text box, entering text into a text box. The third one is getting the text in the text box. So these things will go, and then we will go to radio button. Okay. In the radio button, we will see selecting a particular option in the radio button, the radio buttons, and getting the state of radio button. So this is all we will be actually covering in this flow. So we are learning everything about a clicking on a button or tapping, we could say, and we are also covering check boxes, text boxes, and radio buttons, right? And the next thing that we're going to learn in this flow is uh, if you could see, we will go to the app. So here there is a back button, right? So from here I would like to come back to the main page, so I just need to click on this back button. So that is also navigations, also we will see navigating backwards is something that we will cover. So why I'm writing all these things is every piece of code that I'm writing over here is related to a particular method in this Appium. So everything will have a particular method to automatically perform that, so that you should be able to actually grasp all of them. And those are the frequent methods that you actually need to that you will actually use in day-to-day life when you're actually automating a mobile app, right? So in any app, these are the common things. You will have button, check boxes, text boxes, radio buttons, and navigation. Navigating uh, back uh, backwards in the app. something that we will try to cover over here. So and then what I'm gonna do is uh, this flow launching preferences is this one. Yeah, let's kickstart with this, and we will cover more in the next sessions. So along with this, we also need to we will also learn about invoking a driver. Invoking a driver would be the first step all of this, before all of this. So we will actually see the code to create capabilities. Create capabilities. Why do we need these capabilities? Create desired capabilities, I would say. Why do we need these desired capabilities? Hello.
Invoke
This
driver.
Yeah, desired capabilities are key value pairs that are used to identify the device and the app, right?
yeah.
Yeah. So these are the capabilities that we have given in the inspector as well. If you remember, using those capabilities only, we were actually trying to connect to the device. Okay. So before invoking this driver, or before even writing the code, the steps that we're gonna do is we need to create a Maven project and add dependencies. We will create a Maven project, and the second thing we're gonna do is we're gonna uh, add the dependencies. What dependencies that we need is, so the first dependency we need is Java client or Appium, Java client Appium, and the other one is uh, Selenium. As I was already saying, it's a layer on top of Selenium. Okay, so these are the two jar files that are required to actually uh, configure our project. Once this step is done, we will invoke the driver, and then we will see automating this particular flow. Okay, so that's the whole agenda for today. Okay, let's go step by step. So what is the first thing that we are intended to do is we have to create a Maven project and adding the dependencies. Okay, and on the fly we may be getting some errors, and you should be able to figure out why we are actually getting those errors. Okay, so I'll introduce some errors, and you should be able to if you understood that architecture clearly, you will be able to figure out what could be the issue. All right, so let's go ahead and start creating a Maven project. So for that I need to actually get my Eclipse. So now we are actually replacing the inspector with our IDE, right? So through IDE, we use the client libraries, and then we will be actually doing the stuff. So that's the reason we actually eliminated it. I mean, instead of inspector, we are trying to do this stuff. Okay, all right. So let me go to this project explorer, and let's create a new Maven project. So I'm going to create a new Maven project. So I click new, and then select Maven project and click on next, and then I'm creating a simple project and clicking on next. And here let's say Appium. So this is gonna be my project. I'm clicking on finish. So once it is done, uh, we got a project created, right? So you can go to pom.xml and add the required dependencies. Okay, so to add the dependencies, we need to have a tag called as dependencies. Inside these dependencies, we will be adding our dependencies. So let me go to any of the two. Let me go to Maven repository, Maven repository, and search for Appium. Here it is, Java client, and it should be from io.apm. Okay, that's a webjet we have seen, right? So go to java client.apm and get the uh, version. Okay, uh, let's get this 8.3.0. Okay, I'm getting this version, this dependency, and we are adding this dependency uh, to our pom.xml. Okay, so now we got the Appium client libraries, which is like and also along with this we also need Selenium, is what we have discussed, right? So now what I'm gonna do is I also need to get the Selenium jar files, I mean dependencies. So I'll simply search for Selenium, click on search, and this is what I would like to actually add to my library, which is Selenium Java. I'll get the latest version of this. It's always that's fine. Let me get 4.8.0. I hope that's more stable one. So there is a new artifact. Okay, I'm adding this particular jar file now. So now we got both the dependencies added to our we got both the dependencies added to our pom.xml now. And if you save this, it actually builds the project and it adds the relevant jar files to your Maven dependencies. Here you could see all the libraries or the jar files that are required and got unpacked by the Selenium, by the dependencies that we are added. So the dependencies that we have added is Java client from io.apm to be more precise, and Selenium Java. Okay, so that's what we have actually done over here. I don't know how to add the text. All right, so we got this from io.apm, and we also got Selenium Java, and we added these dependencies. With this we are done with this particular step, right? So we are done with this. This is done now. So this is done now. uh, the next thing that we have to do is we have to invoke the desired capabilities and then invoke the driver. All right, so that's what we have to actually go ahead and do now. Okay, for that what I actually need to do is I need to create a new class, right? Inside the class I actually need to give my piece of code in the main method, and then I'll launch some code. So the first step is I need to create a class. So click on creating a class, and I should be giving some name to that particular class. Let's say invoke driver, or API demos. Okay, um, let me call this as Appium flows. So now I also need main method, because from the main method I only the code runs, right? So I'll make this class. I'll ask this IDE to create main method inside my class with name API demos flow, and I'll click on finish, so that I'll get my new class. So inside this we need to add a code. So the first thing that I have to do is there is a class name called as desired capabilities. Okay, so these are the desired capabilities. So we need to create an instance for this particular class. So do control 1 and assign this to a local variable, and I'll say this as cap, or else capabilities. Okay, so I created a class of this desired capabilities, and now I'll add the key value pairs to this instance. Capabilities dot, there is something called as, there is a method called as set capability. Okay, so set capability will take two parameters. One is the capability name and the capability value. Okay, and further, to get more details of these capabilities, we have something called as, so what are the capabilities that we want to set now? Let's talk about them. What capabilities that we have given in the um, I mean to say, in the APM inspector, we gave only platform name, right? We haven't given anything else because there is only one device that has been available. So we don't actually want to give any more capabilities. But in the real world, we actually need to give few other parameters as the capabilities. Um, Something like what app actually you want to actually invoke. Okay, these kind of stuffs you actually need to provide. Okay, so those are the key value pairs. Right now, to connect to this device, I'll actually pass the APK file, or the APK file which is used to actually install that into this particular device. And also I'll pass the framework. This is Android, right? So I'll also pass automation name, uh, which is like UI Automator 2 for Android. And I'll also pass platform name, which is, uh, I mean to say, what is that platform name? Platform name would be Android, right? That's what we have used. And also the device name. So the device name would be the name with which you have created. Instead of directly checking over here, the best way to actually create these capabilities before doing anything else is, launch your APM inspector and try to connect with those capabilities from the APM inspector. And once you are successful over there, then you can come back to your Eclipse and pass the same thing. But before that, you have something called as mobile capability types. Okay, dot. So when you say dot, you will see everything that are what we are talking about. Okay, so it has platform name, and it has many capabilities that have been accepted. So one is, uh, we are talking about automation name. When I select this automation name, on the right side you could see which automation engine you want to use. As this is an Android, the automation engine that we want to use is UI Automator 2. Okay, and we are also going to pass device name. Device name is the kind of mobile device or emulator to use. Okay, and the device name we will get using emulator hyphen list hyphen avds, right? And also there is something called as app. App is nothing but the APK file. For iOS it is .apa, and for APK files it is for Android. For Androids it is .apk files, right? So we also got the APK files downloaded into our instance, into our machine, and we just need to give the path of that. Okay, so this way you could see all different kinds of um, capabilities that we could use to connect to the device inside this mobile capability type. Okay, which is coming as a bundled from Java client, Appium Java client. Okay, so we will use those things and we will actually try to invoke the driver, and we will shortly see how to actually do that stuff. But before that, the important thing would be, to actually test the capabilities before passing over here. We will test the capabilities whether they are working correctly or not by just using inspector. And we also need inspector because we want to inspect the elements, right? So we are talking about a flow that we want to automate. So we want to click or tap on different buttons, enter the check boxes. For everything we need the identifiers, right? So we need identifiers for each and every element, and using those identifiers, we will actually act on those elements. The first step would be the identification, and then act, and then performing action on it. So for all these steps, the first thing would be identification, right? So identification would be the first step. So identification would be done using inspector again. So we need inspector at any cost, and then we will perform actions on them, using uh, the libraries that have been provided by Appium client. Okay, so that's the whole thing. But before that, whatever capabilities that I want to pass over here, I want to test them before actually giving over here, so that I can directly use them and trust those capabilities directly. So I'll open inspector first. Okay, so in this inspector, I'll actually get all my capabilities that I want to pass. So go to this. So the first thing that I would like to do is, the platform name is something which I want to set. So the platform name in my case would be Android, correct? Platform name is Android. So I want to give this. And the second parameter that I want to use is automation name. So these will be default. Automation name and platform name would be the default things that you would pass. Whether it changes for iOS and as well as for Android. For iOS, this is XUI test, whereas for Android, it is UI Automator 2. Apart from this, I also want to pass a parameter called as app, which tells which APK file to be used. So I'll give this app as the capability, and what would be the value? The value would be the path of your APK file. Okay, so mm, so when you select it as a file path, you will get an option to actually choose the path where your apk file is present. So you could browse to your apk file and get that path. So it is basically stored in this apks for us. No, where is that apk file? Here it is. Let me directly pass that. Let me get the path and repaste it over here. Step to control A, control C, control C, and give the path over here. So this basically specifies uh, mm, the inspector or the server to actually install this particular apk file onto the device. Okay, so these are the capabilities that I would like to actually pass on to them. So one is platform name, automation name, and app name, and it is also better to pass the device name as well. So the device name specifies what is the name of your device. Okay, so go to your device, and my name of the device is epic classes, right? This is the name of my device that I would like to connect. So I'll give this name over here. So I would like to connect to the device which has already been launched using these parameters. And why I'm check I mean, this is like a second round of validation. Before passing them into the script, I'm checking whether these parameters or these key value pairs are successful to in connecting to the device that we are intended to. Okay, so when I say start session, if it actually connects to that. Okay, could not connect to the server. Are you sure it is running? If you are using the browser version, also ensure your Appium server has started without allow course. What could be the reason for this? Why we are getting this error?
Is the server started?
Yeah, server
Yes.
is not started.
Have to start the server.
Yeah.
APM
So we
server.
are because we are not we the server is not started yet. We need the servers to get started. So let me open this APM. And what is the command that I have to give to start the server?
APM.
Appium.
Yeah. APM is something that I actually give to. So I just gave APM, and now the APM got started. Okay. So if I want to start the session now, I'll just click on start session. Yeah. So the connection is successful now. So what I could do is I could just simply save these capabilities for my further uh, save. So these are the capabilities that I would like to use uh, in my Eclipse as well. So let's give one by one. So what is the platform name that I would like to uh, so platform name would be Android, right? So get the value from there and paste it over here. Platform name is Android, and again capabilities dot set capability, and the second capability name is automation name is what we would like to give, right? So again type mobile capability type dot what is that automation name which we want to actually give. So the automation name is so I the automation name that I would like to connect to is UI Automator 2. Okay, so I'll just give this as UI Automator 2. And then and there is one more thing I would like to mention to you is when you click on start session, so there is something called as session information over here. If you go to the session information, you would actually get these capabilities given over here. I mean, this is the piece of code that you would actually uh, uh, which you're actually trying to connect. Okay, so the same thing, we are creating an instance for desired capabilities, and we are setting different key value pairs as the capabilities, and we will be using these capabilities at later point of time to actually launch the driver. So this is the part for invoking driver. You could even get them over here, but these may not work, or I mean these have some extra parameters, so these may not be working sometimes, or may work or may not work, but that's an additional feature I would like to mention to you. So you could get these capabilities directly from um, from here as well. Okay, uh, but using the existing class is something which is more like uh, which is more feasible way or good way, I would say. So I'll go ahead with this. Okay, the next thing would be automation name is done, right? So what's the next thing that we would like to do? Let me close this, go back to my
App.
app is something which I want to use, right? So mobile capability type dot app, and here we have to give the path of that particular app. Path would be the same thing. So this is the one. So we need to have double forward slashes to escape the character. So I'm giving this path over here. And the last thing that I would like to give is device name, right? Capabilities dot set capability and mobile capability type dot device name, and the name of my device is, so this is the name of my class. So with this we created all the capabilities, right? So these are capabilities, key value pairs, I would say desired capabilities used to connect to an Android device. So now we got our capabilities. To invoke the driver, we have a syntax as new. So we are actually trying to create an Android driver, right? So to this Android driver, we actually need to give a parameter called as remote address. Is the address of remotely or locally started APM server. You could see over here. What is this remote address? Remote address is the address of locally or uh, remotely or locally started APM server, because we want all our requests to be redirected to that particular server, right? So we know the architecture, right? So inside in the middle we will have this APM server sitting, and this is our capabilities client code. So we need to redirect our request to this server, which on which this particular APM server is actually listening, right? So that's the whole point. That's the whole point of giving, or the or the need to actually give the remote address. Okay, let's get that. And the second thing, the second parameter that we have to give is capabilities, because the APM server should know what capabilities it has to use to connect to that device, right? So that's, those are the two things that we have to actually give over here. So I'm clicking on new Android driver, and to pass the URL, the syntax is, again, there is an class called as new URL, and to this URL you have to actually pass the address that you want to redirect to. So my server is sitting on localhost, right? So the localhost address is 0000 or 127.0.0.1. Both are localhost addresses, and then the port number on which it is actually sitting is 4723. Okay, my APM server is, my APM server is started on the port number 4723, where this is something you could see it's listening on port number 0000. 0000 is same as 127.0.0.1, and the port number is 4723. Okay, so we gave that. Along with that we also need WD and hub. Okay, so that's what we have seen. So that's the default uh, port URL which we need to append it, and that comes from um, the requirements. Okay, so now we got our first capability ready, and the second capability would be the capabilities. So these are the capabilities that we have to use to connect to that device, right? So I'm done with this. So this requires throwing an exception, and I'll say control 1. When you say control 1, you would automatically get an assignment. So simply name this as driver. So this piece of code will actually connect to the app on your emulator. Okay, now we got your emulator ready, and you got your capabilities ready. Instead of driving or connecting to the emulator from the inspector, we are trying to connect to that emulator from um, you know uh, from the client code, or from the IDE. So let's just try to see what happens if we stop the server and restart the server. To stop the server, you just have to give control C. So when you give control C, the server will get stopped. Okay, so you could even clear that. Let's see what happens uh, if you are actually not starting the server and trying to connect to this device. Okay, so just do a right click And it's always better to know the shortcuts as well. Control Shift O is to actually remove all the unnecessary dependencies and adding all the dependencies. Control Shift O uh, uh, is the shortcut for that. Control D is to delete any line on the on the let's say I have some random line, and if I want to delete this, just do Control D. By selecting that line, just do Control D so that it gets deleted. So I'll let you know the shortcuts that I'll use so that they may be able to help for you too. All right, now we got a script ready, but the server is not started, and we would just try to understand what is the error that we will be getting in that case. Okay, the error this says is no further information, connection refused, no further information, could not start a new session, possible class or invalid address of remote server or browser startup failure. Okay, so we are giving an address over here, but we don't have any server running on that particular port, so we are getting this error. So could not start a new session, possible causes are invalid address of the remote server. Okay, so let's start the server again and see how this works. So I'll start the server. Now we are all set in terms of the architecture, and if I actually run this Java application now, we should actually able to see the app getting launched over here. So it's still running and it launched the app. So this is the app that we are actually intended to launch, right? So it launched that particular app. From here we got our setup ready. The whole thing now we want to do is we want to actually get the XPaths and perform actions on that, right? So now we are done with this part too. We are good with this part. uh, we are good with this. So the next thing is we have to click on a button. What is that button? The button would be the preferences button. Okay, so now we have seen connecting from the Eclipse using the desired capabilities and using Android driver. Okay, instead of Android driver you could use different options. For iOS we have specific thing, and generalized one is Appium driver. We will also see them at later point of time when we get a good understanding of automating a single app at least. So the next thing would be to actually click on a button. Okay, how to actually perform that is, so I got this app closed. So now we want to click on this what's that button, preference, right? So I need to get the um, identifier for this button. So to get the identifier, again the only option is we have to go ahead and use the inspector. So to start the inspector session, now click on start session so that the inspector will also try to connect to that particular device. Okay, uh, now we got our inspector connected to the device, and what we would like to identify, we would like to identify this preferences, right? And you also know all these options that are available over here in inspector. We have seen validating the XPath that is been written by us is valid or not by using this button, and this is the refresh button, and this is something to select the elements. Okay, so the element of my interest is preferences now. Okay, so use this button, go to the button that you would like to identify and click on it. So now we got the what to say, XPath and accessibility ID. We got these two parameters. So I would like to go for accessibility ID for now, and we will also use for XPath for one other element, and we will see different kinds of parameters that we could use to identify the elements. Right now I'd like to identify the element using accessibility ID. Okay, how to use accessibility ID when identifying an element? So there are two methods to identify the elements. Okay, one is find element and the other one is find elements. Maybe one who have attended Selenium sessions already will have good understanding of this, but I guess few don't know what is find element and find elements, right? Am I correct? Or everyone know what is find element and find elements?
No, sir.
No,
We
sir.
don't know,
No,
sir.
sir.
No, no, right? So let me explain you what is find element and find elements before going forward. So find element is a method that that is used to identify an element on the app. Okay, so we use this driver instance. On this driver instance which we have created, this driver instance is nothing but the instance of this app which we have launched on this inspector. Okay, so on this driver instance we have two methods, one is find element and the other one is find elements. Okay, so if you could see the bottom. Okay, this is find element. So what this is says, find the first web element using the given method. This method is affected by the implicit wait times in force at the time of execution. The find element invocation will return a matching row or type again repeatedly until the configuration timeout is reached. Find element should not be used to look for non-present elements and assert zero length response instead. Okay, the whole point is it returns the what it returns the first matching element on the current page. Okay, so we to this find element method we pass something, so that this find element will use that something. We call this as an identifier or locators. There are different locators that are available. One such locator is accessibility ID. We more frequently use XPath and accessibility IDs in mobile apps. As time passes on, we will also see different kinds of locators that are being available. For now, you let's talk about accessibility ID in the XPaths. So these are the locators. So this is the locator key and the value that are being used to identify this element uniquely. Okay, so we have to use these parameters to identify an element. So on this page, I'm trying to identify this element which is preferences. And this preferences has these identifiers of the locators. So I'll use these locators to identify the element. Okay. So for the automation script to do that, it uses a method called as find element. And to that find element, we pass a parameter, and that parameter, it uses that parameter to identify the element. So let's suppose I have multiple preference buttons on this page. Let's say I have three preferences buttons on the same page with the same properties. Okay, or else I could say this way, if I use class as an identifier. Okay, this preferences has class Android widget text view, and also the media also has class name Android widget text view. Okay, so if I use this as an identifier, the class as an identifier, what happens is there are multiple elements on the page. Okay, so there are multiple elements with the matching locator on the page. In that case, find element will return as the first matching element. The first matching element in all these rows would be the accessibility ID, because accessibility ID animation ending to the views, all these buttons will have the same class name. If I use class name, it gives me the element, the first matching element. The first matching element here would be the accessibility ID. Okay, to keep it short, find element will return as the matching element, the first matching element, uh, for the parameters that we pass or the locators that we pass. Whereas find elements, it's a plural form, it returns us all the matching elements as a list. That's the difference. So find element, to the find element we pass a locator, and the locator could be anything. There are many kinds of locators, like you have to give this way, you have to use by dot. When you say by dot, you can use any of these parameters to identify an element. Class name, CSS selectors, ID, link text name, partial link text, tag name, XPath. So these are all you could use, and we have seen this in the Selenium sessions. But to the ones who have not covered that, let's just understand about, we will just use XPath only. Let's talk about test of them later. So by.xpath means you're trying to identify the element using XPath. Okay, you know how to construct an XPath as well. We discussed this in the last session, but you're not seeing accessibility ID over here, right? You're not seeing accessibility ID anywhere. Okay, so how to use that accessibility ID now is something that you have to understand now. Okay, so Appium does provide another by, which is Appium by. So if you go to the by, something that you just have seen, this by is coming from Selenium. Okay, this by is coming from org.openqi.selenium. This is coming from Selenium, but Appium is something which is built on Selenium, is something that we have discussed, right? So Selenium doesn't need accessibility ID because Selenium is used for web automations, and on the web automations you nowhere see something called as accessibility ID. So that's the reason you don't see that accessibility ID when you are using by. So that's the reason Appium came up with something called as Appium by, which you could use for the identifier specific to the Android or iOS. Okay, so which is Appium by. Okay, dot, when I say dot here, you could see something called as accessibility ID. Okay, you could use this accessibility ID to identify that particular element. Appium by dot accessibility ID you could use, or else you could also have something called as mobile by. Okay, so we have mobile by, but which is deprecated now. Earlier we have this io.apm.java client mobile by dot accessibility ID. So I could pass that accessibility ID here, but this is actually deprecated now. So the one that I would like to click now is preferences, right? So let me get the accessibility ID of that, which is preferences. I just need to pass it over here. uh, what's the version of that we are using? Have you used the latest version? Yes. So you could see the mobile buy is deprecated now. It's like crossed. This is no more been supported by the Appium. So for instead of this, Appium provided something called as Appium buy, which is maybe some projects which you have seen might be using older versions of Appium, and they might be using mobile buy. But in the latest versions, we got something called as Appium buy, and Appium by has something called as accessibility ID. And for this accessibility ID, you just need to pass whatever accessibility ID that you want to give. Okay, if you give this particular thing, what this happens is this driver instance, which is nothing but it puts the command to the Appium server, and the command is to find the element. And you, with what parameters you want to find the element? You want to find the element using accessibility ID with name as preference. The key is accessibility ID and the value is preference. So you're asking Appium server to find an element with the accessibility ID is equal to preference, and not only that, you're also trying to click on it. The click is the method which is used to click on a particular button. Okay, so that's something like tapping and clicking is same. Tapping would have different, I mean tapping is something like we would see later, which involves a different kinds of class. But right now click is something like tapping. Click and tapping are same. Okay, uh, so tapping, clicking on a button is called as tapping on, but tapping on mobile devices. But there is an way to actually perform tap as well. It's just naming convention change and different class, but click and tap will perform the same action when it comes to the mobile devices. Okay, so you understood this line, right? So the whole point we are doing over here is we using this instance which is like a which established a connection to the Appium server, which is listening on this particular port. And we are from the client side, we are asking the Appium server to find an element with these parameters, which is accessibility ID and the value is preferences, and we are also asking to click on it. So once it is clicked, it gets us a response whether it is successful or not, and you could even assert that. And in case of clicking, you could assert that in a different way. Okay. uh, this returns us a unique element, and on the unique element you're actually trying to click on it. Using that instance, we are not storing it because we doesn't actually need to store it. We are not using it at later point of time. Yeah, or else you could even do that. Okay, you could understand this. So this actually returns as a web element is what I was saying to you, right? So the send statement to a new local variable. So this returns as a web element, and this web element name would be the preferences button. Okay, so find element will return us a web element, and that web element name would be the that web element will be used to perform actions on that particular element. So this web element is preferences button, or to keep it short, I'll name it as button. On this button, so find element is returning us a single web element. A single web element would be the this web element, which is the preferences button. And what about find elements? Let's see what find elements returns us to us. So instead of find element, I'm using find elements, and I'm using control 1, and I'll have something called as assign statement to a new local variable. And the local variable would be something else, like it doesn't really matter to us, but we will also see this in shortly on how to use find elements. But the only thing that you want to understand is find elements is returning us a list of web elements. List of web elements in the sense multiple web elements, right? So it gets us all the elements matching the property that we are been passing over here. If there are multiple elements on the web page with the accessibility id as preferences, we will get all those elements. Okay, so we will shortly see the find elements as well, and we will use the class name, and let's try to do that stuff in short time. But before that, I just want to kickstart with clicking on this button. Okay, so control V dot click. So I'm doing this click button. I'm trying to click on this button now. So if this is successful, we should be actually able to see the action on the UI. I'm doing a right click, run as Java application, clicking on OK. So it goes to the emulator now. So it launched the app and it clicked on the preferences button. So we are successfully connected to that, and we also uh, got clicked on that preferences button. And now the second scenario is I need to print all these names, all the names of the buttons in the console. So when I say all, the only option would be find elements. You couldn't do find element for each and every element and get that id or the ident or the locator for each button. Instead, you have to make it generalized. You have to find out a locator which is generalized or common for all these elements, and then you have to iterate through that list of web elements, and you have to print the text. Okay, so that's all what we are going to do now. So we clicked on a button and we completed this particular step, right? So tapping and clicking on a button is done, but we added a new scenario, and that is uh, getting all the elements using, I mean, one who completed the selenium is very familiar with this, you know, getting all the elements using find elements and print the name. So this is what we're gonna do now. All right, uh, let's go back to the Eclipse and go to the inspector. And even if you refresh this is not gonna work because uh, we don't have that. It automatically gets closed once we complete our script. So let's go back to that, and even if you refresh now, let's see if that works or not. Still it is not working because it's not pointing out to this instance anymore. This is a new instance of app that we launched, and this is the old instance that we have created earlier. So even if you get your screen updated, even if you refresh, the inspector is not getting connected because this is not the same app, this is not the same instance that you connected for the last time. So every time what you have to do is you have to close this and click on start session again, so that it connects to that, and then when you perform actions and refresh, it actually works. That's the reason why it is
So,
not working.
so if the simulator is already open and if you run the script, does it open a new instance or does it use a already open instance?
No, it actually launches a new instance only from scratch. It's like Selenium. Even if you have this URL open, it no more considers that URL. It freshly launches a browser instance and it starts from scratch.
So,
Same like
oh, so it
Selenium.
will close the existing one if there is one
Yes,
open,
yes,
right? Okay.
yes. So now if you click on views and refresh this, it actually works now. It went to the last thing. I mean, it went to the view screen. I mean, it's in sync with the device now because we got the latest version or the latest instance on the inspector too. Okay. All right. So we clicked on preferences, and the whole point now is to get all these buttons printed onto the console of our Eclipse. So now instead of getting a common, I mean, a unique identifier, the whole point over here is to get the unique identifier for all these elements. So we want to print the text of all these elements, so we need to get the unique identifiers for all these elements. So the unique identifier would be android.widget.textView, right? So we have this android.widget.textView all over for all the elements. So the values are changing, but the class name remained the same for all of them. So I'll just use this XPath and try to actually get all these elements. Okay, so I'll say I want to get multiple elements with the unique parameter. So when I say find elements, and now I'll go with Selenium by, I don't need to actually go for Appium by because by XPath is been available with Selenium as well, right? So this returns us a list of web elements, and let's name this as preference buttons. Page options, I would say. So it is returning as a list of web elements. So when I use find element, let's talk about this. Maybe the one who is listening to this for the first time, what do you think, like find elements, when I use find elements instead of find elements returns to us, what element it would return to us?
All the elements that matches the text path.
Find element,
First
Oh,
element?
find element
This
will
will be the
return
first
only first.
match.
find element will return as the first match. The first match would be the preferences from XML, and that's something which it returns to us. When I use find elements, it returns us all these elements. So we want to iterate through all these elements and get the text out of it. Okay, so iterating through all the elements, you could using do this using for each loop. So I'll say web element, and each reference space option,
Sir,
and
I
uh
have one question. Instead
yeah.
of fall, can we use a stream dot filter?
No, we are not filtering anything. We are iterating through all of them, and then we are actually printing. We could use streams if you are aware of Java.
Hmm.
We could use string and you could use map. But the whole point over here is we have to iterate through all the elements and get the text of each element. So we have to
Okay.
stream through all the elements.
Then when we can use stream and filter? This.
So what you're asking? Stream is something when you want to put all the elements into a stream and do, and if you want to perform some action like filtering, mapping, and all the methods that are available in the streams.
Okay. Thank you.
So here the whole point is we have to iterate through. You have to traverse through all the elements and get the text out of it. So for each is one such option, or list iterator is another option that is available uh, specifically for these collections. And iterator, enumerator, many other methods are there, but that's totally Java, which is not our interest now. um, so we got all these buttons over here. We want to traverse through each button and get the text out of it. We use a method called as dot get. It is not there here. Dot get text. So I want to print this out as well, right? So we could use, so get text will actually get the text of that particular element and prints out to the console. So this is another method that we actually could use, dot get text, which gets the text of that particular element or the web element. So we are doing clicking on the preference button, so that once we clicked on the preference button, it comes back to this particular screen. On this particular screen, we used class name, which is common for all these elements, and we used find elements, which means like our interest is to get list of web elements, and then we are traversing through each of the web element using for each loop, and we are printing the um, text inside that. Okay, so that's the whole thing we are actually doing over here. Right click, run as Java application. So when we do this, what happens is, so you could see we have an existing instance already opened, but it closed it, and it will relaunch the new instance of that app. And then it clicked on preferences, and it is printing us all the values of this buttons that are available. It started from um, preferences from XML. It is printing API demos as well, because maybe API demos might have the same uh, property, text view only. I think so. So we got all of these elements now. Okay, and that's how we can use find element and find elements. Now you got some understanding on find elements and find elements, find element and find elements. Now I'll extend this scenario something like this. Now I want to click on default values now, right? So my interest is to click on default values. So what I will do is, I'll create a string, give the value which I want to click. Okay, option to underscore click. Okay, and here I would like to pass default values. So I'm trying to give default values over here, and here I'll put a condition saying like, if button is equal to, if the value that I'm, or the text that I'm getting out of is equal to, equals ignore case, and the string that I'm passing, which is options to click, that is matching, I would like to click on that button. That button would be this object, right? Dot click, sorry. So what is happening over here is, we are traversing through all the elements. So now Selenium is successful in identifying all the elements on that page, correct? It is retrieving all the elements in this page. Now what we are doing is, inside that we put a condition saying like, when the retrieved text is equal to the text that I would like to actually click on, or the text of the button that I'd like to click on, so then go into the if loop, and perform an action named as click. Dot click will actually click on that button, right? So that's what it will do. So it clicks on that button. So it starts from here. Preferences from XML is not matching with default values. It will not go into if loop. It goes to the next element in the for loop. Launching preferences not matched. Preference dependencies no match. Default values, there is a match, and it enters into the if loop, clicks on that. Okay, and there would be an important catch over here as well, that you should be able to figure it out why you're getting that error. Maybe again, the one who completed the selenium is aware of what is the issue that is going on over here. So let me run this and see what is happening on the screen, and you could say me what is the error and what needs to be done to actually fix that. So I launched the app now, I mean I launched the script now, and now it started actually performing the actions on the screen. So it started the device, it clicked on preferences, it clicked on default values as well. Along with that, we got some error, and that error says, uh, if you actually see this error carefully, what this is saying, it is saying cached elements by.xpath text view does not exist in DOM anymore. Can someone say why we are getting this error?
Oh, I
Uh,
think is it
that's
because it navigated to a different screen? It doesn't have the
Yes.
visibility.
Yeah. So what is actually happening is we clicked on the button. So once we clicked on this button, it went to the next page, right? It came to this page, and we are coming out of this if loop and we are continuing this for loop, which means like continuing for loop doesn't means like we are trying to go to this button preferences from code, which is nowhere on the screen. I mean, these are, that's the reason you're seeing like cached elements. So these are cached elements which is no more there on the DOM. When you clicked on it, it went to the next page and you don't see these elements on the web page anymore. Okay, so what could be done to get rid of this?
break the statement.
Exit the for loop. Break the for
So
loop.
you have to exit or break this
Break.
for loop by just using break over here. So once we clicked on this button, the page got modified to a different page and you don't see these elements anymore. So there is no point iterating through the for loop again. Okay, you have to break this once you clicked on it because you are redirecting to the next page. All right, so that's the whole thing that happens now. Once you, if you run the script now, you won't see this error coming up anymore. Let's just run this and see what is happening on the screen. So it's gonna launch the app now again, clicks on preferences, clicks on default values, and we are no more getting the error right now. Okay, so that's the important flow and the important and the
Sir,
power of uh
sir, when we go for run for Java application, it's launching the device, and also we have to start the emulator, right? The both device will be both instance will be in same page. Sorry, our same instance is coming launching two times.
No, we are actually not launching the emulator from anymore from the automation script. It's already launched and it is just using that instance. We are not launching the emulator. Instead, we are just launching the app inside that emulator.
Okay. Okay.
So this is a constant stuff. We kept the device. We launched the APM server, and we are just connecting to that device through APM server, and we are getting the response. We are not actually automated this APM server and emulator it. Okay, that's that's very big process and we have to do it at the last, and we are just
Okay.
at the
Um,
beginning.
so I have a
We will.
question.
Uh-huh.
Here you have given app, right? So every time you run the script, is it installing the app or?
Yes, it do install app every time. When you use app, it installs the app every time. So on
Okay.
emulator, that is fine, but when it comes to the real devices, there is another way of connecting to it, which is like app package and app activity. I have shown you in the last session, right? So
Yeah,
we
yeah, yeah.
use those parameters. We will come to there, we will cover all these actions, and then we will see different, I mean, the relevant cases later when
Oh,
we.
actually, if we have the app on the emulator, then we can remove that line, right? We don't need that capability, right?
Yeah, if you remove that capability, you have to give an identifier for that app, which is app package and app activity, or else out of n number of apps that have been there on the mobile, it cannot identify the unique app that you want to connect. So in all these apps, how it identifies the preference button is on this particular app. So you need to
Oh,
launch
okay.
that app, So to launch that app, right now we are using the capability called as app, and if we are not using it, you have to use some other parameters. The alternatives are app package and app activity.
Okay. Yeah. So if I use app package here in the script, it should work, right? App package and
It,
app
it,
activity.
it will work. It will
Okay.
work. It's a combination, not only app package. Both app package and app activity should be given. When you give app
Okay.
package, it identifies the app, but out of many activities or many screens on the app, it doesn't identify what to launch or what to trigger. So those two combination is one part, and app is one part. App freshly installs it. App package and app activity identifies the existing app. When we are actually working on real devices, it makes sense to actually see them. On emulators, it doesn't really make sense whether you reinstall it or use the existing one. Whereas on real
So the
devices,
once
it really
uh,
matters.
so once the automation complete in this device, so the automatically the app also get uh, deleted from the instance.
No, no, app will remains there only because you are installing it. You're not uninstalling it. But the session will get closed. That's all. I mean, the app that is launched will get closed.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So maybe it makes sense if I delete this, if I uninstall this and run this. Maybe that gives you more sense. Okay, now I don't have this app anymore. Uh, where I am right now, I'm using this as I would like to show you something, but unfortunately I uninstalled it. So what I mean to say, what I am intended to say is one who is not aware of find elements. The power of find elements is you doesn't need to actually identify the XPath once more again. So if you want to click on a different option, you just need to change this value. That's all. The rest will be taken care by this particular piece of code. So we just developed a reusable component, and we are just changing the values, so that when you want to click on another button, you just need to change the name of the button instead of changing the code. So if you are using this particular version, where you are giving uh, the name, the specific name or the unique identifier for that element, if you want to click on a different option that is there on the web page, it is not possible with this piece of code. Again, you have to get the accessibility id of that element, and you have to pass it over here. But whereas this piece of code will cover all the buttons, so instead, if you want to click on another button, you just need to go ahead and change the value of it. Okay, so I'll actually show you that. Maybe, is that clear? I mean, I just explained you openly. Does that make sense for you, or is that clear?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, these two differences is something that you have to understand. Find elements, you every time have to change the identifier or the locator, whereas here in this case you developed a reusable component, so that it just requires change in the string value. When you give some button 2, it clicks on button 2. When you give button 1, clicks on button 1. Button 3 clicks on button 3. You are just changing the string value, whereas here in this case you have to change the code, which is the XPath itself. You have to change. So that's the whole thing. Now the app is completely uninstalled, and I'm running this instance now. I'm clicking on Java application, and let's see what actually happens. It actually installs that app, but it will not uninstall. Now it got installed, and it launches the app, clicks on preferences, and clicks on default values, and stopped. So the app is not uninstalled. The app will still remain on the device because it installed it. The next thing I'm saying is, here it is not only needed. I mean, if I want to click on this preferences from code or fragment, I could simply do that by changing the value over here. Instead of fragment, I could say default values, I could say fragment. When I say fragment, and instead of equal to ignore case, I'll say contains. It just checks whether this contains in that string or not, so that we can get redundant of this extra things like 7 dot and all. So I just change the value of fragment, and if I run this, it goes and clicks on fragment. Now we haven't changed any piece of code, so it launches the app. preferences, it goes to fragment. I mean, it clicked on fragment instead of default values, it clicked on fragment. The same works for any buttons on this particular page. Instead of fragment, instead of changing the piece of code, I'm just changing this value, which is like, instead of fragment, I would like to click on switch now. So change the value to switch. So if I run this now, it clicks on switch. Instead of fragment, it clicks on switch. So that's the power of a reusable component and the find elements. So you could cover all the elements on that web page simply clicked on switch. So that's all about using find elements. Let's come back and switch to default values now. I'll say default space values. This is also fine. So now we are going to the default values. So we covered find element and find elements, and also clicking on a button and getting text are some things that we are the things that we have covered. And now the next interest for us is default values. Okay, we have to actually perform action on this checkbox. I mean, we have to click on this button or uncheck on this button, check this button and uncheck this button. So to do that, again we have to inspect the identifiers for that element, right? So I just need to close this and reconnect the session because we got a new session on the screen. So let's go to that particular screen. Preferences, default values, and here we are just interested in getting the details of this checkbox. So use this inspector, just refresh the screen so that you will get the latest screen on the simulator. And this is our element of interest. So go here, check that, and you will see the different properties that are present for that particular checkbox. So out of all this, the unique one would be this checkbox. So instead of accessibility ID, we got something different, which is ID now, and this ID has a value of checkbox. And we don't have any other checkboxes on this page, so you could simply go ahead and use this checkbox right away to actually identify that element. And to also check if this is a valid identifier or not, you could construct an XPath and you could check whether you're getting a single element or not. Okay, so if you're giving it as an ID, you have to give the whole thing, but if you could construct an XPath, you could get rid of this Android-ID and checkbox. So I'm giving this and I'm clicking on just. So now we got a single element right now. So that means like even when we use checkbox, we are getting only a single element. So we are free to actually go ahead and use this. Okay, I'm closing this and I'm using this checkbox, or else let's use the whole thing now. Control C, go back there, driver dot find element I dot, we are using ID, and I'm passing this ID now, and this element is the checkbox. This is checkbox, and to be more precise, it is preferences checkbox. So to select or unselect this particular checkbox, it's simple. Again, it's just dot click. When you use dot click, it will uncheck that, and if we check that, if you click on it, it actually checks that. So I'm doing both operations with some. Let me give some sleep over here, 5 seconds, so that you could see the difference. So we will use only click to actually check and uncheck a checkbox. Okay. So let's see if this is working fine or not. I'm doing a right click, run as Java application. So we are clicking on preferences, we are going to default value, and now after 5 seconds we are trying to click on that checkbox, right? So we clicked on it So the checked state changed to unchecked, and now we are again clicking on it, which changed back to checked state. But the interesting part over here is the user should know, right, whether the checkbox is checked or not. When you're clicking on it, it is doing its stuff. That's perfectly fine. But if, let's say, if I want to just check that button, so the I want this checkbox to be in enabled state, or to be selected. So if it is already selected, there is no point clicking on it. So if it is unselected only, then only I have to go ahead and click it. So that makes me get my requirement done on the web page, right, on the mobile screen. So before clicking on it, I want to understand my requirement, and according to that, I have to put an conditional statement. So my requirement is I have to check it whether it is, I mean, I have to check whether it is selected or not. If it is selected, I shouldn't do any operation. If it is not selected, I have to do some operation, which is just a click. So I'll get rid of this multiple clicks, and I'll add just an conditional statement like, if the checkbox is selected, if checkbox is selected, or else I could say something like this: if checkbox is not selected, then do some operation, or else don't do any kind of operation. That's the whole thing that I have to do. I have to add that condition over here. How will I add this condition is, so let's see how to actually get the state of it. So this is the object we are trying to actually concentrating on that element. I have a method called as get attribute. Okay, I have a method called as get attribute, and this get attribute is expecting me to pass a string, and that string is something which is, yeah, interesting, and which is new to know. And let me show you a simple thing on this app. Let me go back to the inspector, and let me close this session. Let me reconnect back to this APK file. I'm trying to reconnect back to this APK file. Preferences, default values. Here is the checkbox. Just refresh the screen and inspect this particular element. Okay. So on this particular element, I have multiple attributes and attribute values. Okay, I have multiple attributes and attribute values. So now concentrate on this checked parameter. Checked is true, right? So checked is true now. So this is already checked, and we are seeing checked as true now. Let us uncheck that and see what happens. I'm unchecking that now. So I uncheck that and come back to here, which is checked is equal to it's still checked is equal to true, because it just requires a refresh so that everything will get refreshed. It's not getting changed. Let's clear this. Okay, checked is true, it's still coming as checked as true. So for even in unchecked state and checked state, it's just coming as true. So we couldn't use this to validate that stuff. So there is something called as selected. Let's see what happens in this case. Let me just click it again, let me select it again, and I just need to find such a kind of attribute so that it is actually changing based on the app behavior. So now it is checked. So I want to actually see what is happening with that selected. uh, Let me refresh source and screenshot. Let me inspect that again. Let's inspect that again, and selected is still coming as false. Just a second, I'll uncheck this, refresh the screen, inspect that again, inspect it again. See, there is just a synchronization issue, I guess, a refresh issue. Checked is coming as false now. The checkbox is no more selected. But if I select this checkbox and I'll refresh the screen now, and I'll try to inspect this element back again, and now see this checked is coming as true. So checked is false when it is not selected, and checked is true when it is selected. Now let's just test this carefully and see what happens. So now the app has checkbox preferences checked and checked as true. So I want to get this value out of it. To get that value, you have to use a method called as get attribute, and to that get attribute, so this is attribute and value, right? So get attribute, the name itself says we are trying to get the attribute value of by passing the name of that attribute. So when I pass this checked as an parameter to this get attribute method, it returns as true. So this whole piece of code will returns as true. Checkbox dot get attribute and the attribute value will get returns as true. And now we are checking whether this equals to equals ignore case false. If it is false, then we have to click on it, or else we doesn't want to click on it, because if it is true, it means like it already got clicked, right? So when it is clicked, we don't want to click on it, because the requirement itself um, is to click on it or to enable that checkbox. So so we are validating here. If it is not enabled, when it is not enabled, we get the checked as false, checked attribute as false. So when checked attribute is false, we want to click on it. If it is not false, if it is not false, it means true. When it is not true, when it is true, it actually in a clicked state, so we doesn't want to actually again click on it and make it disabled, which is like negativity, I mean, which is a negative case of our requirement. So this is how we will get the state of it. So for you, I will also try to show you few more steps. I'll just sys out uh, state of the checkbox is okay. So I'll actually try to print this value again over here, which is preferences dot, so which should give you the true now because it is already in clicked state. Okay. And I'll put a sys out over here saying like I'm not into if loop. I'm not into if loop. So you will not be into if loop because uh, you will not be going into this because it's already in check state. So you doesn't want to go into the loop and click on it again. So this should give you some details of using that attribute value. So let me quickly run this and see what's happening on the UI and how it is behaving. So now we got our app launched, we clicked on preferences, we clicked on default values, and we haven't, I mean, it didn't went into the if loop because status of the checkbox is true. So this if condition will fail and it will not enter into the if loop. Got it? So if our requirement itself is to uncheck that, okay. So now the my requirement is to uncheck that. So uncheck that in the sense when you want to click on the checkbox to uncheck it when it is checked. When it is checked in the sense when checked attribute has value true, then you want to click on it, right? Hope you're getting me. Is that clear?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I'm just running this now and let's see what happens to the checkbox over here. So now it clicked on it because our state, the required state is to uncheck the checkbox, and the state of the checkbox here is true, and we are not into the if loop, correct? And I mean we are into the if loop because initially it is in checked state, which is true, so it matched our condition, so it went into the if loop and actually it selected, or it it selected that checkbox. So now with this, you're done with validating the state of the checkbox, selecting a checkbox and unselecting a checkbox. So this is done. Are you clear with this?
Yes.
Okay. Now let's move ahead and look for understanding handling the checkboxes. Okay. Uh, so again, we have to repeat this a number of times. There is no other option for us. So go to preferences, default values, and we have to click on edit text preferences now. So after clicking on edit text preferences, you have to clear the existing text and re-enter the text and then click on OK. Okay, so that's the first step. In the second step, we will do a validation. So clearing a text, entering a text into the text box and clicking on OK is something that we will cover, and asserting the text, the entered text is something that we will do later as a second step. So with this, we covered the checkboxes. So this is checkboxes code, and this is finding elements and selecting required button. It's just clicking on a button. Single element. So that's all what we are doing it. So let's understand, before going further, let's just quickly rewind what all methods that we have selected. We used click, we used find element, right? We used find elements, and what we covered at uh, we used get attribute, and we also have seen few things like get text is another method that we have used. Where is this get text? Get text is another method that we have used. Any other things? No,
Contains
right?
equal ignore case.
Those are all Java, right? So those are not related to Appium anymore. So these are the methods so far we have used, okay, for actions. And so now let's go to the text boxes and see how they work. So text boxes. So again, I'll take a web element which I want to click on to get the attribute. So this would be, let's go to the app and get the name of it. Edit text preferences button. So this would be edit text preferences button. Underscore preferences underscore button. The identifier for that would be click on cancel and go to your app, close the existing one and start a new session. And here is where what's the app state? We want to go to preferences, default values, and edit text preferences is what we want now, right? So go there. Now from now onwards, it's your turn to tell me what identifier to be used and all. So you should be good by now. So I just inspected this, and now let me know what to be used in this. What can you use in this?
Text.
Yeah, uh, I could go ahead and use text, right? So text is unique for that particular button. So how to use the text? let me go and see the text. So I have by dot, there is nothing like uh, text. Okay, we have linked text and partial linked text, but that's it. Let's go ahead and use XPath for now because we are not aware of Selenium stuff. Let's restrict ourselves to XPath and accessibility IDs for now. So construct an XPath for this, and this is very important. uh, I don't know. So the one who don't, I mean, who have not attended Selenium will have an advantage. I mean, they will have the same syntax now, but this is very important to let the one who understand, I mean, who knows Selenium. So it's a question to you guys, like, what is the syntax of using text in Selenium?
Contains.
Without
No,
content also you can use, right?
no, I want to, let's say, let me give the context. So I have something like this paragraph, my text, and now I want to identify this element using this my text. How can I do that in Selenium?
Text function.
Uh,
Let
slash
me know the
p
syntax. Double
double
forward slash.
slash p
Okay,
Uh,
P.
p
Link analysis,
contains.
text,
text function equal text
Text
parenthesis.
parenthesis.
open
Text
closes
To
is
open
equal to
closes.
and text, my
text.
text.
My text, right? Okay. So this is what I want. So this is the syntax in Selenium. Okay. So when coming to the Appium, this is not same. This text is not as this text. So we give parenthesis because it's a method which gets the text that is present in between the tags. But here it is an attribute. Okay, this text is not same as this text. As it is an attribute, we have to go ahead with the normal syntax, which is at the rate attribute
Equal to.
Equal
equal
to.
to value. Okay, so that's the difference between the text method which is there in Selenium to the text that is over here. So this text is coming in between over here in the parenthesis, it's coming over here. Okay, all the attributes and attribute values comes over here in Selenium as well, right? So when we want to use this, we have to use this syntax at the rate attribute is equal to value. So text parenthesis will be used to you find out the element by using the text inside the parenthesis. Okay, so this text is not the same text in the same text that we are using it here. It is coming as an attribute. So that's the reason when you want to construct an XPath using text over here, you just have to use at the rate text, not parenthesis. Is that clear or not?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, the whole thing is it's an attribute over here. It's not something like we are getting text inside the tags, inside the tag names. Okay, it's an attribute. And when you want to use attribute as a parameter to identify an element, you just have to use the basic XPath syntax, which is double forward slash and the tag name. When coming to the Appium, this would be the class name, and the class name here is Android widget text view. As this is a long text, we don't want to make this XPath messy, so I just gave star, which is a regular expression to identify anything or to consider anything. At the rate attribute is equal to value. Okay, now I want to click on it. So I'll clicking on it. Once I clicked on it, I'll be going to the next screen, right? So I'll be coming to this next screen. Here what I want to do, I want to clear this particular text inside this text box. So I have to identify this element, right? This text box element. So I'll just refresh my screen and just try to identify that element. I'll refresh this screen, and my object of interest right now is this particular option. Okay, so this gives me the text path. So this gives me the text button. So what can I use over here? What's the unique identifier?
ID.
ID is the unique one. So I'll go ahead and use ID now. Control C, and again driver dot find element. I could go ahead with by dot ID, and I could give it as dot. Okay, So this will gives me that object, right? So I'll just do control 1 and assign statement to a new local variable, and let me name this as enter animal text. Okay. So this is the element of driver.find element, I mean that particular object. So here let's understand few methods to clear the text in a particular text box. We have a method called as clear, which clears the text, the existing text in the text box. Okay, so this method dot clear will clear the content in the checkbox. Okay, so we learned new method called as clear, and I want to enter new text inside this. So dot clear will clear all this text, and now I want to enter a new value inside this. So to enter a new value, we have a method called as send keys. Okay, dot send keys, and here I want to enter something called as new animal, and it is new test animal. I'm closing this. So this send keys will send new send text into that checkbox. It's like sequence of keys being entered. Okay, so send keys is a method which enters the text into a checkbox, and after this what we want to actually do, we want to click on this button, which is OK button. Let's identify that button, and let's not do any action on it for now, because I want to make sure you are seeing that action on the checkbox. Clicking is not something which is our interest now. So we are trying to click on this button. OK, and what is the unique identifier for this?
ID.
ID.
Is that ID? Is that not text, which is more unique than button 1, button 2? Okay.
Yeah, text.
Text is something which is more unique because it is tagged with the name itself. So it's not like button 1, button 2. So when you see something, you should be able to actually simply figure out what is that element is. So if I see this, I could simply say edit text preferences. When I see edit, it doesn't actually give me more sense. I mean, what is that actual edit button is, but if you see the flow, I'll understand that is because there is only one um, text box over there. So by just looking at that XPath, one should be able to figure out what is that element basically is. When there is no option, there is no option. But when there is an option, you just need to go ahead and use that. Driver dot find element I dot XPath, and here I just need to give // at the rate text. It's not text parenthesis again, I'm repeating, is equal to, and single quotes I'm giving OK. This is the button which is like OK button. Control F1 and assign this to a new local variable, and this is like OK underscore button. I don't want to click on this because I want you to see that action. Let me put some thread dot sleep over here. Thread dot sleep 5 seconds. So are you seeing any difference from Selenium to this?
No,
Not
Not
much.
really, right? So
not
it's
much.
almost like, so the only that invoking a driver is something that is like a difference. And even from iOS to Android, the only difference would be this invoking only. The rest all scripts works the same. You doesn't need to change any of the script except invoking a driver. So if you move all this code to a particular, I mean, we have seen moving all this code to a different Java file where we are getting the properties from the properties file. So, and invoking the relevant driver. Let's say when I say Chrome, it's invoking Chrome driver. When I say Firefox, it is invoking Firefox driver. You remember that?
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Yes.
the similar way you will just say Android or iOS from the properties file, and we will invoke the relevant driver, and the rest all code will remains the same. Similar, like if it is Firefox Chrome, the whole code will remain same. only the invoking will change. Here also the same stuff, but it has its own methods. We will come to them later. You will see some differences yeah, at dragging and dropping. For drag and drop we used actions over there, if you remember, but here we have something called as touch actions. That's the those will be different. I mean, in the next to next sessions you will actually see the uh, base Appium code, or the classes that have been more frequently used. So these are common
In,
actions which are same like Selenium and this one. So let
in
me
case of
quickly
iOS, we what we use for instead of Android Studio and Android Inspector.
sorry.
If we're going for Apple device,
The inspector
what
would be same, but instead of Android Studio, we are going to use Xcode. So once we are done with Android Studio, we will actually use. I'll show you how to configure your simulator on Xcode and how to actually do the stuff on iOS or Mac machine as well.
okay.
We use Xcode to create a simulator. I mean, I guess I mentioned this in the first session as well. Not sure. Okay, so now we got this API demos. We are clicking on preferences. We clicked on default values and we unchecked the checkbox, clicked on this button, and now we cleared that and we are waiting for 5 seconds. And now we want to enter a new value and we have done that. Okay, so with this, you understood what is clear and what is send case. So the final step would be to click on this button and asserting whether this value is coming right or not. Okay, so I'll click on this button, will be dot click, and what I want to do is, again I will use the same text box, and on this text box there is a method called as get text. Okay? Or else you could also use dot get attribute. So every time you change something, if I inspect this element for now, so you will see text, right? Text is something like default value. When you are entering some new value, let me connect to this session again. Here you entered new value, which is we are here. Okay, it got closed. Let me go to that screen quickly, and so default values, edit text preferences. I have default value only. I haven't clicked on OK. So let's just see what happens. I mean, I'll just refresh the screen and I'll try to select this checkbox. I hope we have to give this bridge of it in 4 minutes. Uh, so default values is here. So the text is default value. Now let me change this to something else, which is like, I'll say text. Else text. Let me refresh this. If you inspect this, if you inspect this again, which if you inspect this again, you will see the text is coming as text. So whatever we are entering over there, it is coming and getting updated in this particular attribute, which is text value. So you could use the same method, which is get attribute, and, pass the attribute name, which is text. And I just want to print this to the console. Sys out. uh, I'll just do this stuff over there. So there is a small error that is there in this code. Could you figure out what it is, what I have missed? I just want to get rid of this sysouts as well. So when I clicked on OK button over here, let's quickly go ahead and see what is it. So when I clicked on OK button over here, so when we do this, it is on the screen. Again, we have to click on this button, then only we will go to this particular screen, right? So after clicking on OK button, this click is also needed. Clicking on this button is also needed. So I'll just do a click on this, and then I'm using dot get text again. Let me quickly run this and see the results now. clearing the value, entering the new value, clicking on OK. Okay, we got some error. What is that? Text edit text preferences. Is that not what we have on the screen? Uh, okay, this is also a familiar error to you. Uh, what is this stale element reference?
I think when you clicked on OK, that window got closed. Now you have to click on the
Hmm.
button again and come to that screen.
So we are actually clicking on it, but uh, we are reading it just before all these actions. Okay, so when we are trying to click on the old button which has different references, it is no more there on the screen, right? So to be keep it short, I just have to reinstantiate or reread that element. Here we have read that element which gets some id of that element, and we are clicking on it, going to a different screen. Now this reference will no more exist. So you're getting me? So you again need to read that element because you got a fresh screen. You are redirecting between screens, so that element references will get changed too. Okay, you cannot use the old reference and click on it again. So you are doing it like, oh, age old reference this is. After that you traverse through different screens and you're coming back again and you're using that reference and clicking on it. So that's the reason you're getting stale element reference. This element is no more on there on the screen. So you again need to actually freshly read that element. The same code has to be actually used to identify that element, but this will get you the updated reference for the new screen. Got it?
Yes.
Yeah, this is something we already discussed for once, I mean, who have attended Selenium. But if that's the reason why we are getting that error for the one who have not attended the Selenium session. Clicking on OK now, clicking on edit preferences, and we are trying to get again, we are using enter this particular reference. We have not read that again. That's why we are getting a stale element reference. So we already have to reinstantiate that again over here. Okay, so again this is stale element reference because we are using an instance that is already been closed and there is a screen traversal. Until unless we don't have the screen traversal, we doesn't actually need to reinstantiate. Whenever the screen got changed and if you're coming back to that screen, when you want to do that, you actually have to um, reinstantiate those or reread those variables or those objects. Then only that's going to work. Okay, so the time is up, because we have to give the bridge to some other class. So I'll just quickly run this and close this off. So edit preferences, we're clearing it. Oh my god, I kept the time again. So we are entering it. We need to wait for 5 seconds and clicking on OK, edit text. And now we got this swing, which is new text animal. So that's how the text is gonna work. And now we are done with this as well. So we will continue with the other parts and other flows tomorrow. All right.